Welcome, everyone. My name is Stacey Wilson-Hunt, and I'm so honored today to be speaking to Michael Sheen from a distance, of course, who is one of the stars of the incredible new AMC limited series called Quiz. And how are you, Michael?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
Under quite surreal circumstances, but I'm doing very well. How are
Oh,
you?
good. Same, lucky, feeling fortunate. And we were talking about our matching plaid shirts. So
Yeah.
we haven't forsaken fashion in these hard times.
Well,
So.
I've taken to chopping my own wood, obviously.
I was going to say you look very ready for that activity.
Yeah.
So I've seen this entire series. It's just 3 episodes, but it is an incredible story and so tautly told by Stephen Frears and so clever. Of course, it's British, so of course it's going to be very cleverly told. But I wanted to know, what did you know about this story going into this project, which obviously this was a huge story in the UK. For me, I actually didn't know that much about it because it happened around 9/11 in the United States.
Yeah.
But I wondered, what did you remember about this and what were your preconceptions about the story?
Well, I remember when Who Wants to Be a Millionaire first came on our screens in the UK, and it was a huge deal. You know, it was such a break from what had come before, really. It was sort of
Right.
completely new concept in some ways. The amount of money, the fact that it was so dramatic and that sort of suspenseful music and the heartbeat pulse going and the lighting and all that kind of stuff. That was very new. And the fact that when it first came out, it was on every night of the week. And I remember thinking, how on earth can a quiz show merit prime time every night of the week? And then, of course, I watched it and I sort of got it. So it had a huge impact just as a show. And I remember when the first person won the million on it and that kind of thing. But like most of the United Kingdom, I think, I have misremembered what happened with the Ingrams, which is what this story is about. Because I felt like I'd seen those episodes come out. It was over 2 episodes. So, on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you have a contestant, and if you haven't finished by the end of that episode, it rolls over into the next episode.
Sure.
With Charles Ingram, that was the case. It was 2 episodes. And I felt like I remembered watching those 2 episodes. But those 2 episodes never went out. They were never broadcast. So everyone in Britain who sort of feels like, yes, I remember that, they don't remember. What they remember is the documentary that was brought out very quickly. When it happened, because it was a huge story in the news. It became a big tabloid story. It was one of those things that suddenly the whole country kind of focused on. And of course, it was in a period of time before social media had really taken off. So, I mean, heaven knows what it would have been like had social media been a thing then. But it was as close to what it is like now with social media then, without it. And so, of course, I remembered all that happening. I remembered, I guess, watching the documentary rather than the actual episodes. And the documentary was made by the people who made Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So it was very biased towards what their view of things was. And so my memory was that there was this guy, this major, who came on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and who cheated because someone in the audience was coughing to help him kind of get the questions. And of course, he's known as the coughing major, but it wasn't him who coughed. It was the person in the audience whose bizarre name was Tequin Whittock. And so I remembered that happening and him being guilty. And there was a thing with his wife as well. And that was it. And so, of course, when this project came along, it was a revelation to me, really, that, what James Graham was doing with his script, James who wrote it, I mean, he's not necessarily saying they were innocent, but he's saying there is a lot more to this story than we were led to believe. And so, like I say, when it first came out, I remembered it, but I misremembered it. Like most people did, because we were sort of meant to, in a way, because our memory of it was very much tailored by the people who were behind the show.
Right. That is really interesting how the mind fills in information when it really didn't have it in the first place.
And like you say, of course, there's the extraordinary thing. I sort of hadn't remembered this, but that 9/11 happened during the events that we, depict in the show. So I didn't remember. I'd sort of separated those 2 things out. Obviously, 9/11 was such a monumental event and everything that was around it. So, for some reason, I hadn't really equated those 2 things. So again, that's a sort of shocking thing that happens in the story as well.
For sure. And in the story, of course, you play the announcer on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Chris Tarrant, who seems like a cool, a kind of slightly eccentric guy. What did you know about him as a personality before taking this on?
Well, he's a bit more than the announcer. He is the presenter of the show. So
right.
He is the face of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Yes.
He was the face of it, and a large part of its success as a format and as a show. And of course, it then got bought by America, and America did their version of it.
And we had Regis Philbin as our guy.
Exactly. Yeah. So Chris Tarrant is, he's a very familiar face in popular culture in Britain. I grew up watching him because as a child, he was one of the presenters of a very popular Saturday morning kids show called Tiz Was, which was sort of this quite anarchic, it's quite rude to children. They were being very kind of edgy as a kids show, I suppose. And there was a BBC show and an ITV show. And the BBC show was very, I suppose in some ways, conservative and very safe and solid. And then the ITV show was kind of wild and wacky. And Chris Tarrant was on the Wild and Wacky show. So I'd sort of grown up with him. And he's been on TV shows, he's presented things, he's done all kinds of stuff. He had an incredibly popular radio show for a very long time here.
Okay.
He was the voice that woke everybody up of a morning and told them what was going on in the world. And,
wow. So he's almost like a Ryan Seacrest type figure. Someone who,
I suppose, yes. Yes,
genres.
Exactly, yeah, yeah, in a lot of ways. But very much a sort of, I suppose, unlike Ryan, not the most glamorous of characters, I suppose, but very much a sort of relatable person, very sort of, man of the people kind of person, and a brilliant presenter of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So that was his, in latter years, that was very much his sort of his big thing. So I was very, very aware of him, as everybody is in Britain. And of course, that brings its own challenges. I've played quite a few.
I was just going to say, you have played quite a few real people. Yeah. What were the challenges and he is still with us too, which makes it an added complication. So how did you approach that balance of, real life with, there's some invention that goes into retelling a story like this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I've found, having played a lot of real life people now, so, David Frost in Frost Nixon, Tony Blair in The Queen, Brian Clough.
William Masters.
Very. Although, well, Masters is different. And so that's interesting, really, because even though Masters is based on a real person, nobody really knew what he sounded like, what he was like, so in the same way. So there's a very particular challenge when you're playing someone who's not only based on a real person, but someone who's incredibly familiar to the audience, or at least in Britain. Right. Because part of what the audience expectations are as they come to it is about how much you're like the person or not, whether they believe that you are the person. And if you don't meet those expectations in some way, then the audience is going to have a very hard job to go with the story, go on the ride, on the journey. And of course, that's the job, is to try and make sure that people do go on the journey. So I don't want people to be, on the one hand, alienated from it because they don't think I'm like him, or whoever the character is. But I also don't want the audience to be obsessing over how much I am like the person as well, because that can get in a way just as much. So the job, in a way, the challenge, excuse me, is to meet those expectations head on, and then try to make sure that the audience lets go of them completely and just forgets about you playing the person. Hopefully, oftentimes when I do these, when I play real people, the first scene is really important, because if by the end of the first scene you can get all that, oh, he's like him, isn't it? Oh, doesn't he sound, or whatever, or not. If you can get that all out of the way in the first scene, then you can just get on with telling the story, really. So often the first scene is something that is a kind of a palate cleanser in a funny way, and then you get on with it. So that's the challenge. The challenge is, how much do I focus on the externals of the character, knowing that the audience will be kind of looking for that, and how much do you just not try to worry too much about how much like the person you are. So my process has always been that you just put a lot of work into it beforehand, so that it becomes almost second nature to be like the person, so that by the time you get to actually filming or on stage, if it's a play, you can forget about it. So that your intention, my intention as an actor, is on absolutely what my intention would be if I was playing a fictional character. It's about, what do I want? You know, how am I going to get it? What's in my way? All those kind of acting interiority things and motivations, all that, you just focus on that rather than going, ooh, am I sounding like him? Am I doing things? Because then that will somehow communicate with the audience and they'll focus on that too much. But if I can, I can let go of it, but letting go of it depends on putting a lot of work in beforehand.
Yes,
so
one thing affects the other very, very importantly. And then did you have access to Chris at all during this process for his tips and, you know, any insights that he had?
I with everyone that I've played based on a real person, I have avoided meeting them if there is the opportunity to meet them. So with, you know, some people, they were no longer with us by the time I was playing them. So that wasn't an option. But with the people that were around, like Blair, like Frost, and in this case, like Tarrant, I chose not to pursue that because I feel like as much as you might gain from that, I can't help but think if you have a personal relationship with a person, that is going to just be there sitting on your shoulder going, ooh, what if they don't like that? What if they, you know, I don't want to be second guessing what the actual person is thinking about. I think you have a responsibility if you're playing a real person and to be, to represent them fairly, certainly. I wouldn't get involved with the project if I felt like the script itself wasn't representing them properly. So in agreeing to do the project at all, I feel like I already feel like I'm taking responsibility for them. But beyond that, I you know, it has to be a rounded portrayal. It can't be something where you're censoring yourself or leaving out certain things because you think that the person themselves might not like it. So, I mean, I do worry about that later, once it's done. It's too late to change it then. I've done what I need to do as an actor, which is to be three-dimensional and warts and all, and, you know, all the black and white, you know, it's not black and white, all the gray areas, all the ambiguity and all that kind of stuff. And then I can worry about what they'll think of it once it's done and I can't change it.
Well, and then in that case, you just blame the director and the producers and say, hey, you know, it's their fault.
And also I was very aware as well that Chris Tarrant himself, because he was interviewed quite a bit once it was announced that we were doing this and in the build up to it coming on, and he, you know, was interviewed because obviously he's a huge celebrity in Britain as well, and he's very clear that they are 100% guilty in his eyes.
Really?
There is no ambiguity. So again, I didn't want to be clouded by that either, rightly or wrongly. You know, I'm not saying that I disagree with him or anything, but I just didn't want that to get in the way of what I was doing in the performance.
Sure. And what surprised you about sort of the complexity of the job that he had to perform? Because it's not a regular MC of a game show where you're giving away cars and things like that. He has to have this sort of ongoing, almost like mental jabs at people, but also keeping the audience engaged. You know, he sort of likes to poke fun at people, but then he also really likes to get in their minds as they're struggling. So what surprised you about that process? Because I think it's easy to dismiss, a host of a show, but really this guy, as you've said, he's the engine that keeps it running, essentially. Yeah,
it's a real balancing act that he does. And of course, through doing all the research, I watched those particular 2 episodes, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. But I watched, you know, stuff throughout the entire series a lot. And interestingly, I watched the pilot episode, which was before they'd sort of got the feel of the show, the tone of the show yet. So the very first time they tried it, it was just like any other game show, and all the, you know, it's very bright studio lighting. It's all very jolly and friendly, and you know, the basics of the game show were there. The, you know, the rules of it, the structure of it was there, but the tone was completely different. And so then you can see when they suddenly struck the what made this show different, which is that kind of incredible lighting and suspenseful thriller kind of element of the lighting and the sound effects. So that was very interesting, seeing that and watching Tarrant, you know, the way he runs it, the way he balances quite contradictory things, in that in order to keep the drama up, you have to keep it suspenseful, you have to keep it kind of edge of the seat stuff. But also, if you scare the contestant too much or alienate the audience too much, then they're not going to perform. So he has to get the best out of them, make them feel comfortable, entertain the audience, but never compromise the drama. Because when that moment comes where you have to really stretch out the drama and the suspense, if you've made the audience too comfortable, if you made the contestant too comfortable, then that's not going to work, you know. So it's a real balancing act. And he is a master at it. He was an absolute master at it. And so much so, really, that Stephen Frears, the director, said to me, look, we've got a complete recreation of the set. And it's in a studio, obviously. So there's nothing on, when you're acting, there will be nothing to distract you from what it would be like when Tarrant himself was doing the show. You know, there's no obvious things like there usually is on a film set where you turn away from what the camera's looking at and you see all the fakeness. I mean, the recreation was total.
It looked very spot on.
Yeah, and he said, and Stephen said, look, watching the show, I can see that Tarrant is the one who runs it all. I mean, he is sort of stage managing it himself. He decides when the certain effects happen. He decides when he gives the answer or not. And, you know, the only thing he's told is when you have to go to a break. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, he is kind of controlling the timing and everything. So Stephen said, when we do those bits, I want you to run it. I want you to do it yourself. I'm not going to do what would normally happen, which is you'd put the effects on later. You put the sound and the music on it. He said, I'm going to give you all the music, all the sound effects. You decide when you say this, the lights will change, you know, just like Tarrant does. So I got a real sense of how much in charge he was of it. And he was absolutely phenomenal. And so a lot of the work that I did in the research was not just about researching him as a personality and as a character, but actually getting to grips with what he's doing in the show, just the mastery of what he's doing.
Wow. Well, I think he's probably happy that people finally know how much work he put in. Right?
Yeah. I know. I keep talking about this all the time, so I hope that keeps him happy. Yeah.
My favorite scene is when they're prepping to give away the $1 million and they realize they don't have the glitter ready.
Where's the glitter man? Where's the glitter man?
That is, and he's in his car eating a sandwich, listening to It's Raining Men. I would love to know if that's actually what happened.
Well, so James swears that is true, that he wasn't there and they had to call for him. Whether he was listening to It's Raining Men or not, I don't know. I'm not,
but it does go with the glitter. The glitter and It's Raining Men kind of go together.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So there's a really great line, and I'm forgetting right now which character speaks it, maybe you remember. And the quote is, "The bottom is falling out on the truth market." And for me, there's no more, I guess, relatable sentiment for our current times than this concept. And that's what I love about the show, sort of the moral ambiguity, where you really like these people. You actually are rooting for them. They're good people. They're hardworking. They're not schemers. But then you also have to ask yourself, well, can I trust this facade that's being presented to me?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, to what degree do you see this story as being symbolic of this idea that truth is completely subjective, as we now know in this tumultuous year in which we're living? But what can people learn about truth from a story like this?
Well, of course, there's a kind of a real juxtaposition going on in the show, isn't there? In that it's about a quiz where there is only one right answer to the questions.
Right.
I mean, there's no alternative facts going on.
Right. Well, that's what Diana says she loves about quizzes, is that there is a truth and some things do have answers.
So there's that is very much black and white.
Right.
But in terms of what happened during these events, whether they cheated or not, whether they really did, do what they were accused of doing, we do not know. There are only 3 people who know the truth of that. And that's, the 2 Ingrams and then Tecwyn Whittock, who was doing the coughing apparently.
Right.
They are the only ones who know whether it happened or not. And they ain't saying. And they still obviously say that they're innocent. And even the people, the show itself who accused them of cheating, they don't actually know how they did it. Their best guess is this coughing thing. But they were just convinced, we know they cheated. We're not quite sure how. So there's a massive gray area there. And so I think the writer was very drawn to that. And in fact, it was a play before it was a TV series. So it was a very successful play here. And in the play, at the end of the first half, the audience all had, like in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the audience get to, you can ask the audience and they get to vote on what the answer is with the little clicker things. And so the audience in the play had those. And at the end of the first half, they had to say whether they thought they were innocent or guilty. And then at the end of the play, they were asked again to vote on whether they were innocent.
What were the results?
Well, I believe that most people used to vote guilty by the end of the first half and then innocent by the end of the play itself. And so, of course, James has structured it in that way. And the TV show reflects that as well, in so much as that over 3 episodes. I think by the end, or a lot of people coming into it already believed they were guilty anyway. But by the end of the piece, I think people change their minds, or certainly have their assumptions challenged. So there is a lot of grey area here, and James, I think, was very much drawn to that you've got the very clear cut nature of quizzes, and then the very unclear cut nature of everything else. And of course, just because we don't know what the truth is, that doesn't mean there are multiple truths. It's still, they either did it or they didn't, in one sense. But also there is, a lot of people also say, well, what is cheating in this context? Some people say, good luck.
Right. And Diana says, I'm just trying to help people, the book that she says she's writing, it's just tips and insider tricks and things like that. So it does beg this bigger question. Well, where does a tip end and cheating begins? And
of course, in the show, another revelation to certainly me when I first read it, and I think most of the audience, was this shadowy organization that in our show are called the Syndicate. I think they were called something else in real life, but this idea that there was this group of people who were actively trying to help people to get on the show.
Right.
And now, is that cheating or not? They would say it's not cheating, we're just organizing ourselves. But ultimately, that syndicate, that group, were responsible for millions of pounds being won on that show. So in fact, interestingly enough, this is where sort of art and real life start to merge a little bit. That the character, the person Paul Smith, who is the person who created the show in the first place, not the clothing designer.
Yeah, the other Paul Smith.
So he came up with the show, and he was sort of the producer of the show. After the play was on, he went to see the play. In fact, all the people involved, the Ingrams, everyone went to see the play at different nights and stuff. But after he saw the play, it kind of reignited his feelings, his conscience, I don't know, about the events. And he decided that he was going to try and meet up with the person who was in the head of the syndicate.
Is that Patty, the Patty character?
Yes. So in the TV series, James has written that scene in. So that scene only happened in real life because James had written the play. And then, of course, he includes it in the TV series. So that's all very meta, all that kind of stuff. But, fascinating. And Paul Smith wanted to know, not to accuse them or blame them or anything like that. He wasn't going for that reason, but he just wanted to understand how much they had affected his show, his baby. And that was when he realized that they had taken millions of pounds from that show, essentially through the way they were helping people. But that's not cheating. It's not illegal. It's just helping people, I guess. And if someone is actually during the show helping someone who is a contestant to know the answers, then that's different. But nevertheless, people, a lot of people I noticed when the show came out here, people on social media, not the majority, but some people would say, listen, good luck to them. If they found a way to do it.
Well, it's also not unlike, in the US, we take these SAT tests in high school. People spend thousands of dollars on prep courses to learn how to cheat the questions and learn, the patterns and how to choose answers. And so, there's a lot of crossover, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that really struck me as well was that, I'd watched the documentary, read the scripts, I'd done all the research. And then when I went onto the set for the first time, in fact, my first day of filming wasn't on the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire set. It was in the court. So that was my first day. But then my second day, I walked into the studio and walked onto this recreation of the set. Which was, I'll never forget that. It was a thrilling moment. It was like walking into, it was like that film Xanadu. Do you remember that film? And they go through the poster into Xanadu. It was like walking into a fiction, and that I had been so obsessed by. Anyway, so that was an extraordinary thing. But then when I got to sit in the seat that Tarrant sat in, and then Matthew, who was playing Charles Ingram, is sitting right opposite me. And for the first time, I was like, oh, Tequin's sitting right there. Like Mike, who plays Tequin, sitting there. Sheen, who plays Diana, is sitting up there in the audience. All these things that I've seen in the show and I've heard people discussing, and he did this, and I'm there. I'm in the most detailed crime reconstruction you could ever do. I'm literally there. Nobody else has ever done that before, other than Tarrant. So I realized, of course, Charles has got his back to the guy who's supposed to be caught. Right. But Tarrant is looking right at him. I mean, I could see Mike was, Tequin was sitting right there. Charles is sitting there. Diana's up there. If he's coughing to give him the answers, I can see him. And he was really close to me. I mean, not far away. I had thought, like most people do, you think everything's sort of bigger when you watch it on the TV. Mm-hmm. When you're actually there, and like I say, it's an exact recreation. He's really close. So I sort of came away thinking, I don't know how they could have done it. It's very hard to believe that there was a guy there coughing every time this guy is, going through the outlet. I find that really hard to believe, having been there. Now, I wouldn't have known, I wouldn't have felt that way had I not actually been able to sit in the exact position. So that was sort of fascinating as well.
It's interesting to think if they'd held the court proceedings on set, so then the jury members could have seen where people were in relation to each other. They could have had a different perspective.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So in closing, I wanted to address something funny that happened a few months ago. There was some confusion between you and another actor with the last name Sheen. Tell me about that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, all my life, I have, since I was a little boy, I used to play a lot of soccer when I was growing up. That was my big thing. And when I was about, I think probably 8 years old, I scored a goal for my team.
Yes.
Which was Bagland Boys Club. And in my town, the local paper, if you scored a goal for your football team on a Thursday edition of the paper, every single person who had scored a goal in all the teams in the town, you'd go through and you'd find your name there. And when I was 8, I'd scored a goal for my team. And I waited till Thursday. The paper came. I looked through everything, and there was Martin Sheen.
Oh,
and that was the first time it happened, and it has happened ever since. The very first time I got my first job, I was doing a play in the West End with Vanessa Redgrave, and I walked into the theatre on the first day of our performances, and the guy was just finishing painting Martin Sheen outside the theatre, and I had to say, "I'm sorry, that's not my name." So this has gone on and on and on. And then when I was in Los Angeles, this is many years ago now. I was in Los Angeles at an event, and someone said to me, Martin Sheen is going to be here tonight. Would you like to meet him? I said, I would very much like to.
After all these years, right?
Yeah, but also just a big fan of Martin Sheen. I think he's amazing. His work is about Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite movies. So I said, yes, I'd love to. So this person came over and said, he's here. Would you like to come over? So she took me over and said, Mr. President, this is the Prime Minister, because I had played Tony Blair at this point. And Martin Sheen said to me, "Oh my gosh, you are the reason I've been getting all these great reviews the last week," which was the sweetest thing. And we ended up talking, and for an hour or something. He was just wonderful. He was absolutely wonderful. Anyway, it has continued. So, there are worse things that happen. But on Quiz, we were sitting here, watching the show, because obviously it came on during lockdown here. So it was it was literally a captive audience, really. And I was watching it. And it was the first time I had watched it as well. And the announcer on the TV, says, and coming up next, it's Quiz. And they said, Quiz, starring Martin Sheen. And I was like, whoa, come on. So I went on Twitter and just said, ITV, come on. As a sort of a joke. And then it became a whole big deal. And then I changed my name on Twitter to Martin Sheen. I have 1 second, just wait there, 1 second.
Okay.
Someone sent me a T-shirt.
That is great.
So it was very funny, but there are a lot worse things to be.
Well, you could be mistaken for Charlie Sheen, so we know you can get much worse, right?
No comment.
Well, thank you, Michael Sheen, so much for joining us today. Your work is incredible, and I have to say this: not only did this show come at the perfect time, but it really feels so of the moment, and something that I think will reverberate as people start to think, what is truth? What is cheating? It's, themes that are ever present in our lives, and to a great degree.
And I mean, I have to say, it is just an incredibly gripping, compelling, entertaining 3 episodes. Well, I was amazed. The reaction here was so great. So I hope people enjoy it if they get a chance to see it.
Well, and I think we still need more fun things to watch. So thank you for that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Stacey. Thank you.